Today we're going to be building a etched brass signal box from Severn Models. As always, there's going to be a link in the description below to their website, as well as links to tools and other materials that I may use in this video. We'll also be doing the interior kit, which is purchased separate from the signal box kit. Like any of these brass kits that I do, I'll start by giving it a quick polish with some 400 grit emery cloth. It makes it just a lot easier to stick the pieces together, and it only takes a couple of minutes. Much like the aeroplane modelers that I watch, I'm going to start this one with the interior, starting off with the shelf which all of the block instruments sit on, and then gluing all the levers into the frame. Yeah, that's right, you heard correctly. I'll be gluing some of this kit together using some super glue from Expo. Some of the larger components I'll solder together. On the fret there's enough to make 3 frames of 12 levers each, giving the builder the opportunity to have an opportunity to pick and choose the layout you want on the interior. With the block instruments folded up, that will be the indicators and the bells, gluing them onto the shelf. Now I'm fairly certain some of you signallers out there might take issue with the way that I've arranged them on the shelf, but I don't know, so it looks okay to me, so that's how it's going to stay. And it does look okay, so we'll move on to folding up and building some of the other detail parts that are included in this kit, and there are a lot of them. A nice comfy armchair, a desk, the stove, the hearth that the stove sits on, and even a little shovel. I used the main body of the building to work out where all these pieces needed to go, and then soldered or glued them on. With the interior complete, options were to paint it or to carry on with the outside of the building, and I chose the outside of the building. There was a lot of detail on the interior, and there is on the exterior as well. All the bricks are individually etched, the wood panelling is etched, and with a little bit of time and ingenuity I'm sure you could get the windows to actually slide in their mounts as well. First thing I did was cut all the windows out and then solder the 2 halves together, the inner frame and the sliding frame. A little bit of cleanup and they were ready to install in the apertures on the main building walls. I'm sure there was probably a better way of holding the pieces together rather than using blue tack, but it was to hand and I couldn't think of any other way of doing it. Until this moment, when I've just thought sellotape or masking tape would have done equally as well. Windows installed, I then made another sub-assembly which was the porch and stairs. Notice I say porch and not toilet because this box doesn't have a toilet. It was built way back at the beginning of the last century when such niceties weren't common, when there was a perfectly good hedge, bush or tree to use. Initially when I started building the steps and the porch, I was using my small soldering iron, but the more pieces that I added on made it a bigger heatsink and I had to increase the wattage of my iron every time. Construction complete, well, of the sub-assemblies, it was time to head to paint, not before a quick dip in some soapy water to get all the grease and grime off. Now this signal box, according to the information given on the instruction sheet and in the book that I've been reading, is a MacKenzie Holland Type 3 box, dating back to the late 1890s to the early 1910s. And when this book was first published back in 1986, there was approximately 20 of this type of box still standing or still operational on the UK's railways. And I suspect that there's far fewer, if any, left operational today. In the description below, I'll link to a website that I found giving a very detailed history on MacKenzie and Holland. Briefly, it was a company that existed from 1860 to 1920. Based in Worcester in the West Midlands of England, they sold their railway equipment, signalling, to most of the companies that were operating in the UK at the time, including some to Ireland and as far away as Australia. I know that one of my weaknesses is painting, and brush painting is no exception. So I'll put it to you that it's not about the application, but the finished result. And as with other projects that I've done, the colour choice on this one isn't particularly what's accurate. It's what I've got in my paint box. And I think it doesn't really matter with some details, especially ones that you can't really see that often. It gives me a chance to use up some of the gunky old paint that's hanging about. Saying that, I did quite enjoy painting the interior, although probably not worth it, as you'll see in a few moments. I also managed to do a little bit of distressing of the metal surfaces. Dry brushing with some metal coat shows up better on the stove. It's the same with the outside as well. The woodwork cladding I painted a beige colour, off-white, off-yellow-ish. Same colour for the inside as well. Then for the window frames I picked them out in white. Referencing the aircraft modelers, I inserted the windows using PVA glue because it dries clear. I was getting a little impatient at this stage and I wanted to get it all closed up. So before I inserted the interior, I thought it might be a nice idea to put a figure in. I picked a few out of the box that I have that contains all my figures, and then it was down to choosing one. Should it be the one sitting down that looks a bit like a tramp, the one that looks like a porter, but opted for the portly chap in the middle. Let's pop him in and give him an arbitrary name of, let's see, Dan? Then we can call him Dan the signalman. Oh, that's so funny. Because if you follow my friend's channel, he is a signalman called Dan. Preparing to entomb Dan in his little signal box, one wonders why I bothered to do all that work on the interior, and the answer comes from the aircraft modelers again when they say the same about the cockpit, that they've spent hours detailing because it's there, and I know it's there. To finish off construction, the last pieces are now going on. That meant masking up to prime the bare metal surfaces that were now exposed. The roof, the barge boards, the chimney. Then, in keeping with the rest of this build, I picked a random grey colour out of my paint tray and sprayed the roof, and a medium brown colour and painted the brickwork. Then, to make the brickwork look a little more interesting and not so bland, I picked out individual bricks with a lighter shade of brown and a darker shade of brown. It looks quite stark and garish here, but once I do the cement joints, that will tone it down considerably. I also got a little bit lost on this build because I ended up taking the masking off and then couldn't decide whether to brush paint or spray the main timbers of the box, and ended up remasking to paint it all green, which was probably the right thing to do. This thing has got well-defined panel line edges and they're all straight, which makes masking so much easier. Now for the cement joints on the brickwork, there's probably a variety of ways of doing it. As like in some of my other builds, I decided to make up a way of doing it. So with some acrylic paint, I first of all flooded the brickwork with water and then added on some diluted greyish coloured paint. Capillary action draws all of the paint into the joints. When it dried it was a little bit thin and opaque, so I repeated the process probably 2 more times. And as you can see, it's toned down all of those garishly painted bricks as well. And talking of toning down, I did the same similar thing with the roof. Just a bit of dry brushing to take the edge off of the hard coloured grey. The last thing to do is attach the porch and the stairs. And that's it, a MacKenzie Holland Type 3 signal box from Severn Models. Now just to advise that this signal box does look quite small compared to some of its contemporary kit brothers. It did make me wonder whether it was actually an N gauge signal box, but it isn't. It is 00 gauge and it does measure up to the drawings in the book. At some stage in the future I will make a name board for it and locate it somewhere appropriate on my railway, but until then it will just sit looking pretty on the shelf. Which might be an appropriate name for it. What do you think? Shelf Sidings 1. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.